The slap lands hard, and the cafe freezes. A single mom staggers, everyone looks away, and the man who hit her smiles, until a quiet stranger in a black suit stands up and locks eyes with him. What Alfredo doesn't know is that this is the last mistake he'll ever make. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. All right, let's get back into it. The slap cracked through the cafe like breaking bone. Jessica Roy's head snapped sideways, blonde hair whipping across her face. Her hand flew to her cheek, red, burning, numb. The cup she'd been holding hit the floor, ceramic shattering into a dozen pieces that scattered like her dignity across the tile. Alfredo Morales stood over her, muscular arms crossed, tattoos rippling as he laughed. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Cat got your tongue?" He leaned closer, his breath hot with arrogance. "This is what happens when you forget your place." Around them, the morning crowd went silent. Customers turned away, suddenly fascinated by their phones, their newspapers, their cooling coffee. No one stood, no one spoke, no one wanted to be next, but someone was watching. A man in a black suit rose slowly from the corner table, his movement so controlled it seemed choreographed. Serratos Pastrana didn't rush, he didn't shout, he simply stood tall, still, tattoos visible along his neck and hands like a map of violence written in ink. His eyes, dark and unreadable, fixed on Alfredo with the kind of attention that made the air feel heavier. Alfredo noticed him and sneered. "Sit down, hero. This doesn't concern you." Serratos said nothing. His hands calloused, scarred, adorned with rings that had cracked more than a few jaws, rested calmly at his sides. Those same hands had once orchestrated empires built on fear and loyalty, had ended careers with a phone call and lives with less. But that was years ago, buried beneath expensive fabric and carefully maintained silence. Alfredo saw a man in a suit. He didn't see the legend. He didn't know that those still hands had commanded rooms full of killers without raising a voice. He didn't know that the tattoos creeping up Serratos's neck were earned in blood, not bought in parlors. He didn't know that intervening here, in this cramped neighborhood cafe, would violate every rule Serratos had set for himself when he walked away from that life. And he certainly didn't know that touching Jessica again would be the last mistake he'd ever make as a free man. The morning had started like any other at Marlena's cafe, tucked between a laundromat and a paycheck advance store on the east side of town. Sunlight filtered through half-closed blinds, casting warm stripes across mismatched tables and cracked vinyl booths that had seen better decades. The smell of burnt coffee and reheated pastries hung in the air, familiar and oddly comforting. An older man nursed his third refill near the window, his weathered hands wrapped around the mug like it was the only warm thing left in his world. Two construction workers argued good-naturedly over a spread of grease-stained receipts, their voices low and rough. A mother with a stroller wrestled a toddler into submission with crackers and patience. This was Survival Central, the kind of place where people came not because the coffee was good, but because it was cheap and nobody asked questions, where single mothers like Jessica could sit for an hour on a $2 cup and no one bothered them, where men like Serratos could disappear into the background and pretend they were normal. Until someone shattered the illusion. Jessica had been trying to make herself invisible, hunched over her laptop at a corner table, pretending to work on her resume while nursing the same coffee for 90 minutes. Her blue dress, the only professional thing she owned that still fit, was wrinkled from being pulled out of a laundry basket that morning. Her makeup covered the sleepless circles under her eyes but couldn't hide the exhaustion that lived deeper. She hadn't seen Alfredo come in, hadn't noticed him until he was standing over her table blocking the light. "Jessica Roy." His voice had been loud enough to turn heads. "You've been avoiding me." She'd looked up, stomach dropping. "Alfredo, I didn't know you." 3 weeks. He'd cut her off, planting his hands on her table, knuckles white against the laminate. 3 weeks you owe me money, and 3 weeks you ignore my calls. "I'm working on it," she'd whispered, aware of every eye in the cafe sliding toward them. "I just need a little more time." "Time?" His laugh had been cruel. "You think I'm running a charity? You think because you got a pretty face and a sob story, the rules don't apply?" She'd tried to keep her voice steady. "I'll have it next week, I promise." That's when his hand had moved, fast and vicious, catching her across the cheek with enough force to rock her sideways. And now here they were, her face throbbing, his chest heaving with righteous anger, the cafe frozen in collective cowardice, and Serratos Pastrana standing between them like a wall made of silence. Jessica looked up at him through the tears she refused to let fall. He wasn't looking at her. His entire focus remained locked on Alfredo, his posture relaxed but somehow more threatening than any fighting stance she'd ever seen. I said, "Sit down." Alfredo's voice cracked slightly, the first hint of uncertainty creeping in. "This is a private matter." Serratos tilted his head, just slightly. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, too quiet for how much space it seemed to fill. "No." One word. Flat. Final. Alfredo's face flushed red. "You don't know who you're messing with, old man. You don't know what I'm capable of." "I know exactly what you're capable of." Serratos took a single step forward, and somehow that small movement made Alfredo take a large step back. "You're capable of hitting women who can't fight back. You're capable of being loud in places where people are afraid. You're very capable of being exactly what you are." The temperature in the cafe seemed to drop 10 degrees. "And what am I?" Alfredo's hands curled into fists, but they stayed at his sides. Serratos's expression didn't change. Small. For a moment, Jessica thought Alfredo might swing at him. His whole body tensed, muscles coiling, jaw clenching. The tattoos on his arms seemed to writhe with barely contained rage, but he didn't move. Something in Serratos's eyes stopped him. Something ancient and patient and absolutely certain. The cafe held its breath, and then Alfredo made his final mistake. He reached for Jessica's arm. Serratos moved. Not fast, he didn't need to be fast. Just precise. His hand shot out and clamped around Alfredo's wrist before his fingers could touch her sleeve, and the sound of that grip connecting was like a door slamming shut on every other possibility. Alfredo froze, his eyes going wide. "I told you," Serratos said softly, leaning in close enough that only Alfredo could hear the rest. "You don't touch her." Jessica watched Alfredo's face drain of color, watched his breathing quicken, watched something fundamental break behind his eyes. Whatever Serratos whispered next, she couldn't hear, but Alfredo heard it, and judging by the way his knees buckled slightly, by the way sweat suddenly beaded on his forehead, by the way he looked at Serratos like he was staring into his own grave, he believed every word. Jessica's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs, willing them still, but they trembled anyway, fine tremors that traveled up her arms and settled somewhere deep in her chest, where breathing had become a conscious effort. The cafe buzzed with whispered conversations now, the silence broken but not dispelled. People were talking, but not to her, never to her. She was the spectacle, the cautionary tale, the woman who'd somehow attracted trouble on a Saturday morning when all she wanted was decent Wi-Fi and enough time to apply for jobs she wouldn't get. Serratos still held Alfredo's wrist. Neither man had moved in what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Alfredo's face had gone from red to white to a sickly gray, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Whatever Serratos had whispered had landed like a blade between his ribs. "Do you understand me?" Serratos' voice carried now, calm and clear. Alfredo nodded frantically. Yes, I understand." "Say it." "I understand." Alfredo's voice cracked. "I won't, I'll leave her alone." "You'll do more than that." Serratos released his wrist but didn't step back. "You'll apologize." Alfredo turned toward Jessica, and she instinctively pressed herself deeper into her chair. His eyes moments ago filled with such certainty, such entitlement now darted around like a trapped animal looking for escape. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. Louder. Serratos' tone didn't change, but somehow the command hit harder. "So everyone can hear you." Alfredo swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, Jessica. I shouldn't have." His voice broke. "I'm sorry." Jessica didn't know what to say. Didn't know if she was supposed to accept it, refuse it, ignore it. Her cheek still throbbed where he'd hit her, the heat of it spreading down her neck. She managed a small nod, not trusting her voice. "Now leave." Serratos stepped aside, creating a path to the door. "And don't come back." Alfredo didn't need to be told twice. He stumbled toward the exit, nearly tripping over a chair leg in his haste. The door chimed as he pushed through it, and then he was gone, disappeared into the morning sunlight like a nightmare evaporating at dawn. The cafe exhaled collectively. But Jessica couldn't breathe at all. She had learned how to endure. Single motherhood had been her graduate education in survival. Every day was a test she couldn't afford to fail. When her daughter Mia's daycare raised their rates, Jessica learned to work night shifts and sleep in 3-hour intervals. When her car broke down, she learned bus routes and the art of carrying groceries 2 miles in the rain. When Mia's father stopped returning calls and then stopped sending checks, Jessica learned that the only person she could rely on was herself, and she had learned, above all else, to stay quiet. Quiet women didn't attract attention. Quiet women could slip through the world without making waves, without disturbing the men who felt entitled to space and volume and other people's fear. She'd learned to make herself small in grocery store lines when men stood too close. Learned to laugh off inappropriate comments at her waitressing job because bills didn't pay themselves. Learned to cross the street when someone like Alfredo appeared on the sidewalk. But this morning, she'd been tired, distracted, desperate enough to meet him in public because she thought stupidly, naively, that a crowded cafe meant safety. She'd been wrong. And when his hand had connected with her face, when the sharp crack of it had echoed through Marlena's cafe, something inside her had broken. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, just a quiet, internal collapse. The final brick in a wall she'd been building for 3 years. The one that said she could handle this. She was managing, she was fine, she wasn't fine. She hadn't been fine in a very long time. "Are you hurt?" Jessica looked up, startled. Serrato stood a respectful distance away, his dark eyes scanning her face with what looked like genuine concern. Up close, she could see the details. The shock had obscured the silver threads in his black hair, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his expensive suit didn't quite hide the working-class build underneath. "I'm okay," she heard herself say. A reflex, an automatic lie. He didn't look convinced. "Would you like some ice?" "No, thank you. Her voice cracked, and she hated herself for it. "I'm fine." Serrato studied her for a moment, then pulled out the chair across from her slowly, giving her time to object. When she didn't, he sat down with the careful movements of someone who understood that sudden actions meant different things to different people. "You don't have to be fine," he said quietly. And just like that, the wall crumbled completely. Jessica felt the tears come before she could stop them, hot and humiliating, spilling down her cheeks in messy tracks that ruined what was left of her makeup. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking, trying desperately to hold back the sobs building in her chest. She was crying in a public cafe, in front of a stranger, in front of everyone. She was exactly the kind of woman she'd promised herself she'd never become broken and desperate and unable to hold it together. "I'm sorry," she gasped between breaths. "I'm so sorry, I don't usually—" "Don't apologize." His voice was firm but not harsh. "You have nothing to be sorry for." She shook her head, unable to speak, unable to explain that she was apologizing for everything, for being weak, for owing money she couldn't pay, for not seeing Alfredo coming, for existing in a way that invited violence, for crying now, adding her mess to a stranger's mourning. Through her fingers, she saw Serrato slide a clean handkerchief across the table, not a paper napkin, an actual cloth handkerchief, pressed in white. The kind of thing her grandfather used to carry. She took it, pressing it against her eyes, breathing in the faint scent of laundry detergent and something else. Sandalwood, maybe. Something expensive and carefully chosen. "He won't bother you again," Serrato said. "I promise you that." Jessica lowered the handkerchief, meeting his eyes for the first time. They were dark brown, almost black, with a weight behind them that suggested he'd seen more than most people survived seeing. "You don't know that," she whispered. "I do." The certainty in those 2 words sent a chill down her spine. Not fear, something else. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. "Why did you help me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "You don't even know me." Serratos was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the window where morning light painted the street in gold. "Because someone should have," he said finally. "And no one else did. The construction workers left first, mumbling about being late to a job site that probably didn't exist. Then the mother with the stroller, suddenly remembering an appointment. One by one, the cafe emptied like water draining from a bathtub, until only the regulars remained, the ones too stubborn or too curious to abandon their posts. Marlena, the owner, emerged from behind the counter with a fresh pot of coffee and 2 clean mugs. She was 60-something, with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun and eyes that had seen every variety of human foolishness. "On the house," she said, filling both cups without asking. Her gaze lingered on Jessica's reddening cheek, then shifted to Serratos with something that looked like recognition, or maybe respect. "You need anything else, you just holler." Serratos nodded once. "Thank you." Marlena squeezed Jessica's shoulder brief. Maternal then retreated back to her domain behind the espresso machine. Jessica wrapped her hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into her palms. The trembling had finally stopped, replaced by a hollow numbness that felt almost worse. She could feel the weight of lingering stares from the remaining customers, could practically hear their thoughts, Poor thing. Should have known better. What did she expect? Owing money to a man like that. How long has he been threatening you? Serratos asked. Jessica's first instinct was to lie, to minimize, to protect herself through deflection. But something about the way he asked direct, clinical, without judgment made the truth easier. 3 weeks. Since I missed the first payment. She stared into her coffee. I borrowed money from Mia. My daughter. She needed. Jessica stopped, swallowing hard. It doesn't matter what she needed. I couldn't afford it, and the bank wasn't an option. So I went to someone who doesn't ask questions. Alfredo. She nodded. A friend of a friend said he was reasonable, that he understood single mothers, gave better terms than the payday loan places. A bitter laugh escaped her. I was desperate enough to believe it. Serratos said nothing, just listened with that same focused attention he'd given Alfredo. But where his attention had felt threatening before, now it felt safe, like he was absorbing her words, holding them carefully. The interest doubled after the first week, Jessica continued, the words spilling out now. Then tripled. He started showing up at my work, at Mia's daycare. Always smiling, always polite in front of other people, but his eyes, she shuddered. He told me there were other ways to pay if I couldn't come up with the cash. Serratos' expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air around him. A tightening, a coldness that hadn't been there a moment before. And today? He asked quietly. Today I told him no. Jessica met his gaze. I told him I'd get him the money, all of it, but I wouldn't. I couldn't. Her voice broke. He didn't like that answer. How much do you owe him? 1,500, which might as well be 15,000. She laughed again, sharp and humorless. I'm 3 months behind on rent. I work 2 jobs and can barely afford groceries. I don't have $1,500. I don't have $15. Serratos reached into his jacket, and Jessica tensed instinctively, but he only pulled out a wallet, expensive leather, worn soft with age. He counted out bills with practiced efficiency, then slid them across the table. $2,000. Cash. Jessica stared at the money like it might bite her. I can't accept this. It's not a gift. His tone was matter of fact. Consider it a loan. No interest. Pay it back when you can. You don't even know me, she whispered. Why would you? Because Alfredo won't stop. Serratos folded his hands on the table. Men like him never do. Fear is their currency, and you've shown him you're afraid. That money, he nodded toward the bills, buys you freedom from him. What you do with that freedom is up to you. Jessica's throat tightened. She wanted to refuse, wanted to be the kind of woman who solved her own problems, who didn't need rescue, who could stand on her own 2 feet without a stranger's charity. But she also wanted to feed her daughter without choosing between electricity and groceries, wanted to sleep without jerking awake at every sound, wondering if Alfredo had found her apartment, wanted to stop being so tired all the time. I'll pay you back, she said firmly. Every cent, I promise. I know you will. He said it with such certainty that she almost believed him. She reached for the money with shaking hands, folding it carefully and tucking it into her purse. It felt heavier than paper should feel, heavier than hope had any right to be. Thank you, she managed. I don't know what else to say except thank you. Serratos inclined his head, acknowledging her gratitude without dwelling on it. He took a sip of his coffee, and for a moment they sat in companionable silence. The café had found its rhythm again. Marlena humming behind the counter, the old man by the window turning pages of his newspaper, the soft hiss of the espresso machine. Normal sounds, safe sounds. Can I ask you something? Jessica ventured. Of course. When you grabbed Alfredo's wrist, she chose her words carefully. What did you say to him? He looked terrified. Serratos was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made her lean forward to catch every word. I told him that I knew where he lived, where his mother lived, where his sister worked. He paused. I told him that if he ever came near you again, if he so much as thought your name, I would make sure he regretted every choice that brought him to that moment. Jessica's pulse quickened. How did you know those things? I didn't. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, but he believed I did. That's what matters. She studied him, really looked at him for the first time. The expensive suit that didn't match the neighborhood. The tattoos that spoke of a different life. The absolute calm in his posture. Like violence was a language he'd learned fluently and then chosen to stop speaking. The rings on his fingers weren't just jewelry. They were weapons. Tools. Reminders. "Who are you?" she asked softly. Serratos met her eyes, and for just a second she saw something ancient and terrible looking back at her. Something that had made choices she couldn't imagine and lived with consequences she'd never survive. "Someone who used to be someone else," he said finally. "Someone trying very hard to stay that way." Before Jessica could respond, the cafe door chimed, and Alfredo Morales walked back in. The cafe froze. Alfredo stood in the doorway, chest heaving, face flushed with something between rage and panic. His tank top was darker now, soaked with sweat. His hands trembled at his sides, not with fear, but with the kind of adrenaline that came from talking yourself into something stupid. He'd brought reinforcement. 2 men flanked him, both younger, both trying too hard to look dangerous. The one on the left had a neck tattoo that crept above his collar, some kind of snake or dragon. The one on the right kept his hand conspicuously in his jacket pocket, the universal sign of someone who wanted you to think they were armed. "Thought you could embarrass me?" Alfredo's voice cracked slightly, betraying the bravado. "Thought you could put your hands on me and just walk away?" Marlena reached for the phone behind the counter. Serratos raised one hand slightly, a small gesture, but she stopped, waited. Jessica's heart hammered against her ribs. The money in her purse suddenly felt like evidence, like something that would get them all killed. She started to stand, to run, to do anything. Serratos's other hand moved to the table, palm down. Not touching her, but close enough that she felt the instruction. "Stay still. Stay quiet." She stayed. Serratos stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket with casual precision. The movement was unhurried, almost bored, and somehow that made it more threatening than if he'd jumped to his feet. "You should leave," he said simply. Alfredo laughed harsh, desperate. "You think I'm scared of you, old man? You think because you got lucky once that means something?" He gestured to his companions. "There's 3 of us now, 3 against 1. You like those odds?" "No." Serratos tilted his head slightly. "But you're going to." The man on the right shifted his weight, hand still in his pocket. "Big talk for someone who's outnumbered." Serratos' gaze moved to him, slow, deliberate. "Take your hand out of your pocket." "Or what?" "Or I'll assume you're actually holding something, and react accordingly." His voice remained perfectly level. "Right now, I think you're bluffing. I think you're 19, maybe 20, and you've never pulled a trigger in your life. I think that's a pack of cigarettes or maybe a cell phone, and you're hoping I'm too scared to call you on it." The young man's face flushed. "But if you keep your hand there," Serratos continued, "I have to treat you like a real threat. And real threats don't leave here on their feet." The hand came out of the pocket, empty. Alfredo's jaw clenched. "You don't know who you're messing with." "Actually," Serratos said, "I do." He reached into his jacket, the same gesture that had produced his wallet moments ago. Every muscle in the room tensed. But when his hand emerged, it held only a phone. He swiped the screen, typed briefly, then turned it so Alfredo could see. Jessica couldn't make out the details from where she sat, but she watched Alfredo's face drain of color, watched his eyes go wide, then wider, watched his breathing quicken into something close to hyperventilation. "That's your apartment on Maple Street," Serratos said conversationally. "3rd floor, Unit 304. The lock is broken, has been for 6 months. Building manager keeps promising to fix it but never does." He scrolled. "That's your mother's house. The one with the blue shutters and the garden gnomes she collects. She waters them every morning at 7. Alfredo's lips moved soundlessly. "That's your sister Carla. Works at the medical clinic on 5th. Takes the bus, always the 8:15. Sits in the back because she gets motion sick up front." Another swipe. "That's your nephew Diego. 4 years old. Goes to Little Learners Preschool. His favorite color is orange. He carries a stuffed dinosaur named Rex everywhere." "Stop." Alfredo's voice came out strangled. "Stop it." Serratos lowered the phone. "I can keep going. I know where your cousin works. I know which bar your friends drink at. I know the grocery store your mother goes to, the pharmacy where she picks up her blood pressure medication, the church she attends every Sunday." The man with the neck tattoo took a step backward. "Alfredo, maybe we should—" "I know all of this," Serratos continued, his voice never rising, never hardening, "because knowing things is how you survive in certain worlds. And you, Alfredo Morales, are a very small fish in a very large pond. You think you're dangerous because you can hit women and scare people who can't fight back. But real danger?" He paused. "Real danger doesn't announce itself. It just arrives." Jessica watched Alfredo's hands curl into fists, watched his whole body shake with impotent rage and dawning terror. He wanted to swing. She could see it in every tense muscle, every grinding tooth. But he couldn't. Something had broken inside him. "You're bluffing," Alfredo managed, but his voice carried no conviction. "You're just some guy in a suit. You wouldn't." "Wouldn't I?" Serrato stepped closer just one step, but it might as well have been a mile. "You walked into a public place and struck a defenseless woman. You humiliated her, hurt her. You did that because you thought power meant being the loudest, the strongest, the most violent person in the room. Another step, but power, real power, is knowing every detail of someone's life and choosing not to use it, until you have to." His eyes locked onto Alfredo's. "Do I have to?" Silence crashed through the cafe like a tidal wave. Alfredo's breathing came in short, panicked gasps. His companions had backed up to the door, ready to bolt. The tough guy posturing had evaporated, leaving behind 3 scared men who'd stumbled into something far beyond their understanding. "I asked you a question," Serrato said softly. "Do I have to?" "No." Alfredo's voice broke. "No, you don't. Then what are you going to do?" Alfredo's gaze flickered to Jessica, then away, unable to hold it. "I'm going to leave her alone. The debt. It's gone. Forgotten. Say her name." "What? You used her name when you wanted to hurt her. Use it now when you're promising to stop." Alfredo swallowed hard. "Jessica. I'll leave Jessica alone. I swear. The money, she doesn't owe me anything. We're done." Serrato studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Good. Now leave. All of you." "And Alfredo?" He waited until the man met his eyes. "If I hear your name connected to hers again, if she has a flat tire, if her daughter gets scared at school, if anything unfortunate happens in her life, I'll know where to find you. And I won't be this polite." Alfredo practically ran for the door, his companions stumbling after him. The door chimed, and they were gone. The silence that followed felt sacred somehow. Holy. Jessica released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, her entire body sagging against the chair like puppet strings cut. Her hands shook worse than before, not from fear this time, but from the sheer impossibility of what she'd just witnessed. A man had walked in ready for violence and walked out destroyed without a single punch thrown. Marlena emerged from behind the counter carrying a bottle of whiskey and 2 shot glasses. She set them on the table without a word, poured 2 generous measures, then disappeared back to her station. Some moments required acknowledgement, others required alcohol. Serrato's remained standing, his gaze fixed on the door where Alfredo had vanished. In profile, Jessica could see the tension in his jaw, the rigid set of his shoulders beneath the expensive suit. Whatever calm he'd projected during the confrontation was cracking now that the threat had passed. His hands curled into fists, then relaxed, curled again. "Are you all right?" Jessica asked, surprised by her own concern. He turned to look at her, and for just a flash, barely a heartbeat, she saw something raw behind his eyes, something that looked like pain. "I swore I wouldn't do this again," he said quietly. "Do what?" "Become that person." He gestured vaguely toward the door. "The one who knows things, who threatens families, who makes people afraid to breathe." He sat down heavily, suddenly looking older than he had minutes ago. "I walked away from that life, buried it, and just now, I dug it up like it never left." Jessica didn't understand, not fully, but she recognized the weight of regret when she saw it. "You saved me, twice." "Did I?" Serratos reached for one of the shot glasses, staring into the amber liquid like it held answers. "Or did I just prove that some men never really change? That violence is always the first language they speak, even when they've learned others. You didn't hurt him. I did something worse." He downed the shot in one smooth motion. "I made him afraid. Fear is slower than pain, but it cuts deeper. It follows you home, wakes you at 3 a.m, makes you see threats in every shadow." His voice dropped to something barely audible. "I learned that lesson a long time ago. In a different life." Jessica took her own shot, wincing as the whiskey burned down her throat. "What kind of life?" For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. He sat there, jaw working, eyes distant, fighting some internal battle she couldn't see. Then he leaned back, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of confession. 20 years ago, my name meant something in this city. Not fame, infamy. I ran operations that touched 5 states, controlled territories, managed disagreements." He studied his hands, turning them palm up as if seeing them for the first time. These hands signed orders that ended careers, destroyed families, buried problems that got too loud. Jessica's breath caught, but she didn't interrupt. I was good at it, he continued. Too good. Started young, rose fast, built an empire on loyalty and fear in equal measure. People respected me. Not because they liked me, because they understood what happened when you crossed me. His thumb traced the scar above his eyebrow. Got this from a man who thought he could take what was mine. He was wrong. They were all wrong. The cafe felt smaller suddenly, closer. I had everything a man like me could want. Money, power, control. I walked into rooms and watched grown men calculate their words before speaking. I snapped my fingers and things happened. Doors opened, problems vanished, entire lives changed direction. He paused. And then I met Sophia. The name came out different from the others. Softer, careful. She worked at a clinic in the East District. Nurse, saw me come in with a knife wound I couldn't take to a hospital. She patched me up, told me I was an idiot, and charged me $20 for supplies. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. She had no idea who I was, didn't care. When I tried to give her $500, she refused. Said if I had that kind of money lying around, I should donate it to the children's ward. Jessica found herself leaning forward, caught in the story. I fell in love with her because she saw a man bleeding and nothing else. No reputation. No fear. Just someone who needed help. His voice roughened. She made me want to be the person she thought I was. So I tried. Started pulling back from the business. Delegating. Planning an exit. What happened? Jessica whispered. Rivals happened. Enemies happened. People who saw weakness in a king stepping down from his throne. Ceratos's hands curled into fists again. They came for her. Thought they could leverage me, force me back into the game. They didn't kill her, didn't need to. Just scared her badly enough that she finally asked who I really was. He was silent for a long moment. I told her everything, every ugly truth, every choice I'd made, every consequence I'd caused, and she looked at me like I was a stranger. Because I was. He exhaled slowly. She left the next morning. Wrote me a letter saying she couldn't love someone capable of the things I'd done. That violence, even distant violence, even justified violence, had a cost she couldn't afford to pay. Jessica's chest tightened. Don't be. She was right. Ceratos met her eyes. That's when I walked away. Really walked away. Dismantled what I'd built, piece by piece. Paid people off. Called in favors. Made arrangements. It took 3 years to disappear, but I did it. Became someone new, someone quiet. And you've been that person ever since? Until today. His jaw clenched. Until I saw that man hit you and remembered exactly who I used to be. How easy it is to slip back into old patterns. How good it feels to have that kind of power again. But you didn't hurt him, Jessica insisted. You could have. I saw it in your eyes, you could have destroyed him. But you chose not to. I chose restraint, Ceratos corrected. That's not the same as being good. That's just being controlled. Jessica reached across the table, her hand hovering near his. Not touching, but close. You protected me. Whatever you were before, whoever you used to be today, you were someone who stood up when no one else would. His eyes found hers, searching for something. Absolution, maybe, or permission to believe her. Sophia was right about one thing, he said finally. Violence has a cost, and I've been paying it for 5 years. He stood, straightening his jacket, composing himself back into the calm, controlled man who'd first stood up. But some debts are worth it. He pulled out his wallet, left $200 bills on the table, far more than their coffee cost, and turned toward the door. Wait, Jessica called. Will I see you again? Ceratos paused, his hand on the door. I hope not. For both our sakes. Then he was gone, disappearing into the morning sunlight, leaving Jessica alone with questions that tasted like whiskey and felt like hope. Alfredo Morales made it 3 blocks before his legs gave out. He collapsed against the brick wall of a closed pawn shop, sliding down until he hit the pavement. His chest heaved, lungs working like he'd just finished a marathon. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes, soaking through his shirt. His companions had scattered the moment they left the cafe. No loyalty there. No brotherhood. Just 2 idiots who'd finally recognized real danger and wanted no part of it. Alfredo was alone. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably his crew asking where he was, why he'd bailed on the card game they'd planned. He couldn't answer, couldn't form words, could barely form thoughts beyond the single terrible truth that kept looping through his brain. He knows everything. He knows everything. He knows everything. Not just surface details. Not just public information anyone could find on Facebook or Instagram. Serratos Pastrana knew things Alfredo had never told anyone. Private things. Family things. The kind of intimate knowledge that meant either surveillance so thorough it bordered on omniscient, or connections so deep they touched every corner of Alfredo's world. Either option was terrifying. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone, staring at the screen like it might bite him. Who could he call? Who could help? His cousin Javier ran with a tougher crew guys who actually carried weapons, who'd done real time. But even as he scrolled to the number, Alfredo's thumb hesitated. What would he say? Some guy in a suit threatened me without touching me and I'm scared? They'd laugh him out of the room, call him weak, a coward, everything he'd spent years proving he wasn't. Except maybe he was. Maybe he'd always been. Alfredo had built his reputation on intimidation, on being louder, bigger, more willing to cross lines than the desperate people who came to him. Single mothers, struggling workers, people so buried in debt they'd accept his predatory terms because they had no other options. People like Jessica Roy. He'd felt powerful when he hit her. Righteous, even. She disrespected him, refused his very reasonable offer, acted like she was better than the situation she'd put herself in. Someone had to teach her how the world worked. Someone had to show her that actions had consequences. The slap had felt good. The fear in her eyes had felt better. And when no one in that cafe moved to stop him, when they all looked away like they always did, Alfredo had felt invincible, untouchable, a king in his small kingdom. Then Serratos Pastrana had stood up, and Alfredo's kingdom had crumbled into dust. His phone buzzed again, this time a text from his mother. "Mijo, are you coming for dinner Sunday? Making your favorite?" Alfredo stared at the words, and something broke inside him. His mother. Her little house with the blue shutters and the ridiculous garden gnomes she loved like children. The woman who'd worked 3 jobs to keep him fed after his father left, who'd believed him every time he promised he was going straight, getting legitimate work, leaving the street life behind, the woman Serratos Pastrana could reach with a phone call. Alfredo's stomach churned. He leaned over and vomited into the gutter, hot, acidic, humiliating. When he finished, he stayed there on his hands and knees, gasping, tasting bile and fear in equal measure. How long had Pastrana been watching? Days? Weeks? Had he photographed Alfredo's family? Followed his mother to church? Watched his nephew play at preschool? The questions spiraled, each one worse than the last, until Alfredo couldn't distinguish between paranoia and reality. Every car that passed suddenly seemed suspicious, every pedestrian a potential spy. The city he'd navigated with such confidence now felt like a minefield, where every step might trigger consequences he couldn't see coming. This was worse than a beating. A beating had an end. You took your hits, healed up, moved on. Maybe you got revenge, maybe you didn't, but at least you knew where you stood. This was infinite, open-ended. A threat that hung over everything Alfredo did, every choice he made, every person he cared about. Serratos hadn't hurt him, had barely touched him, but Alfredo would carry this moment for the rest of his life. He'd wake up at 3 a.m. wondering if today was the day Pastrana changed his mind. He'd see his mother and think about how vulnerable she was. He'd watch his nephew play and calculate how easily that joy could be shattered. Fear was a cage without bars, and Alfredo had just been locked inside. His phone buzzed a 3rd time. Different number. One he didn't recognize. Against every instinct, he answered. Alfredo Morales. The voice was unfamiliar male, professional, carefully neutral. "My name is Ramon. I work for certain people who've taken an interest in your recent activities." Alfredo's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you're—" "The cafe on Morrison Street, 47 minutes ago. You had an interaction with Serratos Pastrana." Silence. Alfredo couldn't breathe. "I'm calling to give you advice." Ramon continued. "Free advice, which you should take seriously. Walk away from Jessica Roy. Forgive the debt. Forget her name. Pretend she never existed." "Who are you?" Alfredo managed. "Someone who remembers when Pastrana ran half this city. When his word was law and his patience was legend, right up until it wasn't." A pause. "He's been retired for 5 years. Quiet. Peaceful. Bothering nobody. But men like him don't forget how to be what they were. They just choose not to be." "He threatened my family," Alfredo whispered. "No," Ramon corrected. "He gave you information. There's a difference. He showed you that he could threaten your family without actually doing it. That's restraint. That's him being merciful. The voice hardened. Don't mistake mercy for weakness. Don't test whether he's still capable of following through, because I promise you, he is. What do you want from me? Nothing. This is a courtesy call. There are people who'd prefer Pastrana stay retired, people who benefit from his absence. But if you force his hand, if you make him become what he used to be, Ramon let the implication hang. Well, that would be bad for everyone. Especially you. The line went dead. Alfredo sat there, phone pressed to his ear, listening to silence. When he finally lowered it, his hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. He thought about going after Jessica anyway, about proving he wasn't scared, about gathering his crew and… No. That was pride talking, and pride was expensive. Alfredo pulled up his contact list, found Jessica's number, and blocked it. Then he deleted it entirely, opened his Ledger app, and erased her debt, removed every trace of her from his phone, his records, his memory. She didn't exist. She'd never existed. And if Alfredo was very, very lucky, Serrato's Pastrana would forget he existed too. He pulled himself to his feet, legs still unsteady, and started walking. Not home, not to his mother's, not anywhere familiar, just walking, trying to outrun the fear he knew would follow him forever. Jessica stayed in the cafe for another hour after Serratos left. She told herself it was because she needed the Wi-Fi to finish her job applications, that the coffee was already paid for, that Mia wouldn't be done with her playdate until 3, so there was no rush. But the truth was simpler and more complicated. She didn't know how to leave. The cafe had become something different in the span of 90 minutes. It had been the place where she was humiliated, then the place where she was saved, and now it was the place where she had to figure out what came next. The money in her purse felt like a bomb. $2,000 in cash, more than she'd held at one time in years. Freedom. Possibility. A chance to breathe. And yet, you gonna stare at that laptop all day or actually type something? Marlena appeared with a fresh pot of coffee, topping off Jessica's mug without asking. Sorry, I'll order something else. Did I ask you to order? Marlena's tone was gruff but not unkind. She pulled out the chair Serratos had occupied and sat down with a heavy sigh. Been running this place for 32 years. Seen a lot of things. Today was something new. Jessica's fingers wrapped around the warm mug. I'm sorry for the trouble. You apologize a lot, you know that? Marlena studied her with eyes that had probably dissected 1,000 stories over 3 decades of coffee and conversation. You apologized to that pendejo Alfredo even after he hit you. Apologized to Pastrana for crying. Apologizing to me for existing. When you gonna stop saying sorry for taking up space? The question hit harder than Jessica expected. She opened her mouth, ready with another apology, then stopped herself. I don't know, she admitted. Well, start figuring it out. Marlena leaned back, the chair creaking under her weight. That man who helped you? He's not coming back. You heard him. So whatever this feeling is, this gratitude, this debt, this thing you think you owe him, let it go. I can't just… You can. You will. Marlena's expression softened slightly. He did what he did because it was right. Not because he wanted something from you. Not because he expected you to carry it around like a weight. He gave you a gift. The way you honor that is by using it. Jessica swallowed hard. The money. Forget the money. I'm talking about the other thing he gave you. Marlena tapped the table between them. Dignity. He reminded everyone in here, reminded you that you matter, that you're worth standing up for. Don't waste that. The words settled into Jessica's chest, warm and uncomfortable, like swallowing something too hot too fast. Around them, the cafe had returned to its normal rhythm. The old man by the window had ordered a sandwich. A young couple had claimed the corner booth, sharing earbuds and laughing at something on a phone. Life continued, indifferent to the violence and grace that had unfolded an hour ago. But Jessica felt different. She'd spent 3 years making herself small, quiet, forgettable. It was safer that way, or so she'd convinced herself. Stay invisible, and men like Alfredo wouldn't notice you. Keep your head down, and life's cruelties might pass you by, except they hadn't. She'd been noticed anyway, hurt anyway. And when it happened, all her careful invisibility had bought her was a room full of people who looked away, until someone who had every reason to stay silent chose to speak. He used to come here every Saturday, Marlena said suddenly. Serratos. Same table in the corner. Same order. Black coffee. No sugar. Never bothered anyone. Never caused trouble. Just sat there reading the paper like a normal person. Used to? Haven't seen him in 3 weeks. Figured he moved. Found a new place. Marlena's gaze drifted to the empty corner table. But he came back today. For you. Jessica's throat tightened. You think he knew Alfredo would? I think he's the kind of man who notices things. Who probably saw that bastardo hassling you before and made a choice to stay close. Marlena stood, gathering the empty coffee pot. And now he's gone again. Because that's what good men do when they carry bad pasts. They help and they disappear before they can do more harm. She walked away before Jessica could respond, leaving her alone with thoughts that tasted like coffee and felt like revelation. Jessica's phone buzzed. A text from her friend Lisa. How's Mia's playdate? Want to grab her together? I'm near your place. She typed back quickly. That would be amazing. Thank you. Then she opened her banking app, something she usually avoided because the numbers only made her anxious. Checked her balance. Still negative. Still drowning. The $2,000 in her purse wouldn't fix everything, but it would stop the bleeding. Pay off Alfredo. Catch up on rent. Buy groceries without choosing between milk and bread. It would give her time. And time, Jessica was learning, was the most valuable thing you could give someone who'd forgotten how to hope. She pulled out the cash, counted $1,500, and slipped it into an envelope she found in her purse. On the outside she wrote, For Alfredo Morales. Debt paid in full. She'd drop it at the check-cashing place where she'd first met him. Leave it with the clerk. Let him know, let the universe know that she owed him nothing, that whatever power he thought he had over her was gone. The remaining $500 went back into her wallet. Enough for rent. Enough to breathe. Enough to start figuring out what came next. Jessica closed her laptop and stood, slinging her purse over her shoulder. As she walked toward the door, she caught Marlena's eye and mouthed, Thank you. Marlena nodded once. A benediction. A dismissal. An instruction to go forth and stop apologizing for surviving. The cafe door chimed as Jessica stepped into the afternoon sunlight. The street looked the same as it had that morning, cracked sidewalks, tired buildings, the same bus stop where she waited every day, but she felt different. Lighter, somehow. Like she'd put down something heavy she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. She pulled out her phone and called Lisa. Hey. Yeah, I'm good. Actually, she paused, surprised by the truth of it. I'm really good. I'll meet you at the park. As she walked, Jessica noticed things she usually missed. The way sunlight caught in the trees, the sound of children laughing from a nearby playground, the smell of bread from the panaderia on the corner. The world was the same, but she was different. And maybe, just maybe, different was enough. 3 blocks away, Serrato's Pastrana sat in his car, watching the cafe entrance through his rearview mirror. He saw Jessica emerge, saw her pause, shoulders straightening, saw her pull out her phone and actually smile at whatever she heard. Then she walked away, head high, and disappeared around the corner. Serratos released a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Stay gone, he whispered to himself. Stay good. Then he started the engine and drove in the opposite direction. Toward the past he'd promised himself he'd never revisit. The text came 3 days later. Serratos was in his apartment, a modest 2-bedroom in a building that asked no questions and remembered no faces when his phone buzzed with a number he hadn't seen in 5 years. We need to talk. R. He stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the delete button. Ramon, his former consigliere, the man who'd handled everything Serratos couldn't or wouldn't do himself, the bridge between the legitimate world and the one built on fear and favors, the man he'd specifically told never to contact him again. Serratos typed, No, we don't. The response came immediately. Café incident, made waves. People are asking questions. Meet me. 1 hour. Old place. He should refuse. Should block the number, throw the phone in a drawer, pretend the message never arrived. That's what the new Serratos would do, the quiet one. The man who drank coffee and read newspapers and lived like violence was something that happened to other people. But the old Serratos, the one who'd surfaced in that cafe, who'd threatened a man's family with the ease of breathing, that version was curious. 1 hour? He typed back. The old place was a restaurant in the warehouse district, the kind that served excellent food to people who preferred their conversations private. Serratos arrived exactly on time, scanning the room with instincts that hadn't dulled despite years of disuse. Ramon sat in the back corner booth, looking older but no less sharp. Silver threaded through his dark hair now, and he'd traded the flashy suits for something more conservative. But his eyes dark, calculating, missing nothing those hadn't changed. You look good, Ramon said as Serrato slid into the booth. "Retirement agrees with you. I'm not here for small talk." "No. You're here because a man named Alfredo Morales walked into Marlena's cafe and walked out terrified." Ramon sipped his espresso. "And now people who'd forgotten about Serrato's Pastrana are remembering why they used to be afraid." Serratos's jaw tightened. "I helped someone. Nothing more. You revealed yourself. That's everything." Ramon leaned forward. "Do you know how many people I've fielded calls from in the past 72 hours? People who thought you were dead. People who thought you'd left the country. People who'd built their operations assuming you'd never come back. I'm not coming back. They don't know that. All they know is that the man who once controlled half this city just demonstrated he still has reach, still has knowledge, still has teeth." Ramon's voice dropped. "You've destabilized an equilibrium that took 5 years to build." Serratos felt something cold settle in his chest. "What do you want, Ramon? I want to know your intentions. Because right now, there are 3 different factions trying to decide if you're a threat or an opportunity. The Koreans think you're planning to reclaim territory. The Italians are debating whether to welcome you back or eliminate you preemptively. And the independents." He shook his head. "They're scared. Scared people make bad decisions. I threatened one small-time loan shark. That's all." "You think that's all?" Ramon pulled out his phone, scrolled, turned it toward Serratos. "Alfredo Morales has stopped operating entirely. Forgave every outstanding debt. Closed his books. Word is he won't even leave his apartment." Serratos said nothing. His crew scattered. Nobody wants to be associated with the man Serratos Pastrana personally warned off. Ramon pocketed his phone. "You created a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. That's not my problem. It will be when someone tries to fill it by testing whether you're really as dangerous as the stories say." Ramon's expression hardened. "You can't be half-retired, Serratos. Either you're out completely, invisibly out, or you're in. There's no middle ground. Not in this world." The words hit like a physical blow because Serratos knew they were true. He'd built his reputation on certainty, on being exactly what he appeared to be. The moment he introduced ambiguity, he became a target. "What do you suggest?" he asked quietly. "Disappear. Really disappear this time. New city, new name. Let me spread word that you're gone for good." Ramon paused. "Or come back. Reclaim what was yours. There's still infrastructure in place. People who'd follow you. Money that never got redistributed." "No, then disappear." Serratos thought about his apartment, his Saturday mornings at Marlena's, the carefully constructed quiet life he'd built from the ashes of his old one. Thought about Jessica Roy walking out of that cafe with her head high, free from the fear that had hunched her shoulders. Thought about never seeing that moment again. "I'll disappear," he said finally. Ramon nodded, relief flickering across his features. "Good. I'll handle the narrative. Make sure people know you're gone. That the cafe thing was a goodbye, not a hello. And the woman? Jessica Roy? She'll be fine. Untouchable, actually. Nobody in this city will go near her now. You've inadvertently given her the best protection possible, your legacy." Ramon stood, dropping cash on the table. "Give me 2 weeks to clean things up, then vanish. And this time, stay gone." He left without another word. Serratos sat alone in the booth, staring at nothing. Around him, the restaurant hummed with quiet conversations and clinking silverware. Normal sounds, safe sounds, sounds that no longer belonged to him. That night, Serratos stood on his balcony overlooking the city. Lights stretched to the horizon, a million lives being lived, a million stories unfolding. Somewhere out there, Jessica was putting her daughter to bed. Marlena was closing up the cafe. Alfredo was lying awake, wondering if today would be the day Serratos changed his mind. And Serratos? He was realizing that some choices don't have expiration dates, that violence, even justified violence, creates ripples that spread far beyond the initial impact. That 5 years of peace could be undone in 5 minutes of action. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Thank you, Jay." He stared at the message. Jessica. She must have gotten his number from Marlena. 2 words, simple, devastating. He wanted to respond. Wanted to tell her she was welcome, that she deserved protection, that seeing her walk out of that cafe with dignity intact had been worth every consequence. But responding meant connection. Connection meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant she could become leverage if the wrong people noticed. So he deleted the message. Then he blocked the number. Then he stood on the balcony and let himself feel the weight of that choice, the necessary cruelty of protection from a distance. Tomorrow, he'd start planning his exit. New city, new name, new life. Tonight, he'd allow himself to remember what it felt like to be someone worth thanking. Even if he could never accept the gratitude, the city glittered below him, beautiful and indifferent, and Serratos Pastrana began the slow work of becoming a ghost. Again, Serratos spent the next week erasing himself. He started with the apartment, packed his belongings into 3 suitcases, everything he owned, everything that mattered, clothing, a few books, a photograph of Sophia he'd kept despite knowing he shouldn't, the physical remnants of a life lived quietly, everything else he left behind. The furniture came with the place, the dishes, the coffee maker, the small television. He rarely watched, all replaceable, all meaningless. When you'd spent 20 years building an empire and then another 5 dismantling it, you learned the difference between possessions and attachments. You learned how little you actually needed. His landlord, a Vietnamese woman in her 70s who'd never asked questions, accepted his notice with a slight nod. "You good man?" she said, counting the cash he'd given her last month's rent plus extra. "Quiet, clean. I hope you find peace." The words stuck with him as he loaded his car. "I hope you find peace," as if peace were a destination, a place you could arrive at and stay. He'd thought he'd found it 5 years ago. Thought walking away from the life, from the power, from the weight of other people's fear, would be enough. And for a while, it had been. Saturday mornings at Marlena's, anonymous days spent reading, nights where he slept without dreaming of the choices he'd made. Then Jessica Roy had been slapped in a cafe, and peace had evaporated like morning fog. On his second-to-last day in the city, Serratos drove past Marlena's one final time. He didn't go in, didn't even slow down. Just drove past at normal speed, eyes flickering to the window where his usual table sat empty. The cafe looked exactly as it always did, worn, comfortable, utterly ordinary. A place where people came to exist without being noticed. He'd been one of those people, would never be again. 2 blocks later, he pulled over, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. This was harder than he'd expected. Leaving the first time had been easy because he'd been running toward something, toward the possibility of being better, different, clean. He'd had hope then, belief that distance and time could transform a man. Now he was just running. And he understood, with painful clarity, that geography didn't matter. You carried your past with you. It lived in your muscle memory, your instincts, the way you assessed threats and calculated exits. It lived in the tattoos on your hands and the scars on your soul. It lived in the moment you grabbed a stranger's wrist and made him understand exactly what kind of monster you could still be. His phone rang. Ramon. "It's done," his former consigliere said without preamble. "Word's out that you've left, permanently. The Koreans are satisfied. The Italians are throwing a party. Everyone's relieved the ghost isn't coming back to haunt them. Good. There's something else." Ramon paused. "The woman, Jessica Roy. She went to the police." Serratos's blood went cold. "What?" "Not about you. About Alfredo. Filed a report about the assault, the loan sharking, everything. She gave them names, dates, records she'd kept." Ramon's voice carried something that might have been admiration. "She's not hiding anymore. She's fighting." Something warm and painful bloomed in Serratos's chest. Pride, hope, the knowledge that his intervention hadn't just saved her, it had reminded her she was worth saving. "Will she be safe?" he asked. "Safer than most. Alfredo won't retaliate, and I've put word out that she's protected. Nobody touches her. Ever." Ramon was quiet for a moment. "You did good, Serratos. Even if it complicated everything, you did good. Doesn't feel like it. It never does. But that woman is alive and fighting because you stood up. That counts for something. They said their goodbyes, final ones this time. No promises to stay in touch. No assurances they'd meet again. Just the acknowledgement that some chapters end completely." Serratos sat in his car, engine idling, watching the city wake up around him. Morning commuters rushing to jobs, parents walking children to school, the ordinary machinery of life grinding forward, indifferent to the small dramas and large consequences that shaped individual fates. He thought about driving to the cafe one more time. Thought about walking in, ordering coffee, sitting at his table. Thought about seeing if Jessica might be there, might look up, might smile. Thought about all the ways that could go wrong. Instead, he pulled back into traffic and drove toward the highway, toward the state line, toward whatever came next. The drive took 6 hours. Serratos arrived in a mid-sized city he'd chosen almost at random, big enough to disappear in, small enough to navigate. He'd rented an apartment online, sight unseen, paid 6 months up front in cash through a service that specialized in discretion. The building was unremarkable. The apartment more so. 1 bedroom, basic furniture, a window that overlooked a parking lot. It could have been anywhere, could have been nowhere. That was the point. He unpacked slowly, methodically, hung his clothes, arranged his books, set Sophia's photograph on the nightstand, then moved it to a drawer. Some ghosts needed to stay buried. When he finished, the apartment looked barely lived in, temporary, transitional, like he was still leaving even as he arrived. Serratos stood in the center of the empty living room and let himself feel the full weight of what he'd done. He'd helped someone, saved someone. And the cost was everything he'd built in 5 years of careful invisibility. The cost was peace, but maybe peace had always been an illusion. Maybe men like him didn't get to retire, didn't get to walk away clean. Maybe the best they could hope for was to choose their moments, to use their violence sparingly, carefully, only when someone crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He'd crossed his own line in that cafe, and he'd do it again. That realization settled into his bones like certainty. If he saw another Jessica, another moment where someone needed protection and no one else would provide it, he'd stand up, he'd intervene, he'd become the thing he'd spent 5 years trying to forget. Because some truths were inescapable. Violence lived in him, would always live in him. The question wasn't whether to use it, but when, and for whom. Serratos walked to the window, looking out at a city he didn't know filled with people he'd never meet. Somewhere in his old city, Jessica Roy was rebuilding her life. Marlena was pouring coffee, Alfredo was learning to live with fear, and Serratos Pastrana? He was learning that redemption wasn't a destination. It was a choice you made every single day, sometimes quietly, sometimes with someone else's wrist in your hand and whispered threats in their ear, always with the knowledge that the man you were would always shadow the man you wanted to be. He closed the curtains. Tomorrow, he'd find a new cafe, a new table, a new attempt at peace. Tonight, he'd let himself remember what it felt like to matter, even if mattering meant leaving. Jessica Roy stood in front of the bathroom mirror, practicing. "My name is Jessica Roy, and I'm here to interview for the administrative assistant position." Her voice sounded stronger than it had a week ago. Steadier. She'd been practicing for 3 days now, ever since she'd received the call back from the law firm downtown. A real job. Benefits, salary instead of hourly wages and crossed fingers. A future. Mia appeared in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Mommy, you look pretty." Jessica turned, smoothing down the blue dress, the same one she'd worn to the cafe, now cleaned and pressed. She'd thought about buying something new with Serratos' money, but decided against it. This dress had survived the worst moment of her life. It deserved to see the best ones too. "Thank you, baby." She knelt down, eye level with her daughter. "You're going to stay with Miss Lisa today, okay? And when I pick you up, we'll get ice cream, even if you don't get the job?" Jessica smiled. Even then, because she'd learned something in that cafe, something that had taken root in the days since. Her worth wasn't conditional, wasn't dependent on whether she succeeded or failed, whether she had money or didn't, whether someone chose to help her or look away. She existed, she mattered, and that was enough. The police report had been terrifying to file. She'd sat in that sterile room, telling her story to a detective who'd probably heard 1,000 versions of it, wondering if Alfredo would retaliate, if reporting him would make things worse instead of better. But the detective had listened, had taken notes, had told her she was brave. And 2 days later, she'd received a call. Alfredo Morales was under investigation. Multiple women had come forward after Jessica's report. He wouldn't be threatening anyone for a long time. She'd cried when she hung up. Relief, gratitude. The strange, weightless feeling of a burden lifted. The interview went better than she'd hoped. The managing partner, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and no-nonsense demeanor, asked about her work history, her skills, her ability to handle difficult situations. Jessica thought about Alfredo, about standing in that cafe with her cheek burning and her dignity in pieces, about choosing to file that police report even though every instinct screamed to stay quiet. "I'm good under pressure," she said, "and I don't give up easily." The partner smiled. "When can you start?" Jessica picked Mia up from Lisa's apartment, true to her promise. They went for ice cream at the small shop near the park, 1 scoop each. Chocolate for Mia, vanilla for Jessica. They sat on a bench in the afternoon sun, watching other children play. "Did you get the job?" Mia asked, chocolate rimming her mouth. "I did. Because you're smart? Because I tried." Jessica wiped her daughter's face with a napkin. "And sometimes that's enough." They finished their ice cream in comfortable silence. Around them, the city hummed with its usual chaos, cars honking, people talking, the distant sound of construction, the same sounds that had filled the background of Jessica's life for years, but she heard them differently now. Not as noise, but as evidence. Evidence that life continued, that the world kept turning, that moments of violence and grace could exist side by side, and neither one defined you completely. You defined yourself. That evening, after Mia was asleep, Jessica sat at her small kitchen table with a pen and paper. She wrote, "Dear Serratos," then stopped. What could she possibly say? Thank you felt inadequate. The money sat in her account. She'd only used $1,500 to settle with Alfredo before learning he'd forgiven the debt entirely. The rest she'd saved, a cushion against emergencies that used to flatten her. But the real gift hadn't been the money. It had been the reminder that she deserved protection. That silence wasn't safety. That taking up space wasn't a crime. She started again. "Dear Serratos, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't even know where to send it, but I needed to write it anyway. You changed my life in that cafe. Not just by stopping Alfredo, but by showing me what strength looks like. Real strength. The kind that doesn't need to be loud or violent. The kind that chooses restraint but could choose otherwise. I filed a police report. I got a job. I'm rebuilding. And every time I want to make myself small again, to disappear, to apologize for existing, I remember you standing up. I remember that someone thought I was worth defending. I hope you found your peace. I hope wherever you are, you're not carrying the weight of that moment as burden. Because for me, it was salvation. Thank you, Jessica." She folded the letter carefully, slipped it into an envelope, and wrote, "Serratos Pastrana" on the front. She had no address, no way to send it. But she tucked it into her desk drawer anyway. A record, a testament, a reminder that Grace sometimes wore expensive suits and carried violent pasts. And that was okay. People were complicated. Redemption was messier than stories pretended. And sometimes the best thing you could do was stand up when everyone else sat down. Across the city, Marlena wiped down tables as closing time approached. She paused at the corner table, Serrato's table, and allowed herself a small smile. He was gone. She'd known he would be. Men like that didn't linger after revealing themselves, but he'd left something behind. Not money or words or promises. He'd left a story. One that Marlena would tell for years about the quiet man in the black suit who'd reminded her Café that power didn't always corrupt. Sometimes it protected. She finished wiping the table, turned off the lights, and locked the door. Outside, the city sparkled under streetlights. Inside, in the silence, dignity remained, quiet, permanent, waiting for the next person brave enough to claim it. Thanks for staying with this story right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.